393, I believe. We're getting up there. Getting up there. This clip, you're about to hear Joe Rogan talk about or ask the question to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., why did you end up running for president? And I really like what he says because he illustrates the picture of America that everybody kind of holds in their mind when they hear the American dream. A time when, and this is what Trump meant. So many people used to question, when was America ever great? It's like, are you out of your mind? Of course there was arguably still great, needs a lot of fixing, but there was an absolute time when it was all great, not just great, the greatest, unquestionably. So you're about to hear Robert F. Kennedy talk about that in this clip, but I got to bring you guys to the store. I absolutely love this podcast. You have no idea. Not my podcast, but Joe Rogan and RFK. It's so vital. We got the sold not for sale stuff. We got the anti-WEF stuff, and we have the great resist stuff. Check out a t-shirt real quick. This is my newest design. You've heard of the Great Reset? Well, resist it and join the Great Resist instead. Anybody who's purchased anything off this website, thank you so much. You have no idea how much it means to my wife and I, and you are truly appreciated if you've purchased anything off this site. You have no idea how much it means to us. We can't thank you enough. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's get into this clip. Switch it over there.
What pushed you to want to run for president?
I saw, I grew up so proud of this country and loving, this country and being proud. And, I grew up at a magical time in American history, which economists call the Great Prosperity. It's a time between 1947 and 1980 when our country became the wealthiest country in the world. We developed the middle class like nothing that's ever been seen in history. That became this economic machine and a machine for democracy. And we were generating during that period half the wealth on the face of the earth we owned here in this country. Everybody wanted American things. America was, it was a moral authority around the world. It was a leader, and everybody wanted our leadership. They don't like our bullying, but they wanted our leadership, and they knew the difference. But they wanted, I would travel in Europe when I was a kid, and with my father and my mother, and people just adored our country. And people wanted blue jeans. They wanted American cars. They wanted Victrola, RCA Victrolas, and our electronics, and they wanted our movies and our television, and and they wanted our democracy. And I want my kids to grow up with that love for our country and that pride for our country. And I don't see the path from either political party getting us there at this point. I think, both parties have lost their way. And my party, the Democratic Party, has become the party of war. It's become the party of censorship. It's become the party of pharmaceutical companies, of, the neocons, this very aggressive, belligerent foreign policy, that's forever wars. And then, of the kind of political suppression that we saw, and this bizarre turning our backs on the American middle class, which is the only thing that sustains democracy. If you don't have a middle class, you cannot. Any political scholar, political scientist will tell you that if you have large aggregations of wealth at the top and widespread poverty below, that formulation is too unstable to support democracy. And the middle class has just been wiped out in this country, and nobody's talking about it. It's really, and I think that's why, Trump was so popular. Is he was the one guy who's talking to those people, and and he's saying, and they're angry because nobody's listening to him. And Trump said, I'm listening to you, and I'm going to go break things for you. And they are angry, and they want things to get broken. And I think, you know.
Now, this clip runs for like 15 minutes. I'm not allowed to play that much of the clip, but I really thought that that first part of his answer really spoke volumes, right? Because he talks a lot about what his father was trying to do, what his uncle was trying to do, meeting with Martin Luther King, wanting to have people out in Washington, like camped out there, kind of like an Occupy Wall Street type of thing. The fact that his father got the most rural state and the busiest city type of state, and he kind of bridged the gap, and a lot of people didn't celebrate, but a lot of people paid their respects when they had to bring his father's body through a lot of different towns and states. And he just touches on a lot of things, but that first part about wanting to have his children, grandchildren now, of course, and children, but he's older, wanting them to grow up in that America, that great America, where people wanted everything from America. They wanted American cars. Like, how often do you hear that now, right? They wanted our leadership. They wanted the leadership. That's the key, a very key thing. They wanted the leadership. Now they do not, because, and he touched on this while he was speaking, they didn't like the bullying, but they wanted our leadership, and they knew the difference. And I think that's a big part of why we're in the position that we're in right now, because the current leadership is more invested in bullying, is more invested in, doing the things that you're seeing, home and abroad, not caring about the middle class whatsoever, caring way more about other countries. 113 billion, I believe, the Ukraine-Russia conflict has cost America. 113 billion could have easily been invested into America, into the people, into the middle class, into the lower class, into the urban areas that everybody complains so much about, that are crime ridden. Could have been invested into the police instead of wanting to take money from the police. Could have invested into more training, a better police force, invest into the veterans, the ones that are like at 29 a day killing themselves, I believe. Could have invested into a lot of different things. So right now, the current leadership is just not invested in the people like they need to be. And I feel like, and again, you have to watch the podcast, but he's talking about investing into the middle class, investing into people, and how important that is. And one thing that he touched on when he brought up democracy, and how you need the middle class thriving in order to keep democracy. I think we're seeing that right now, because when you have nothing but lower and everybody feels like they're lower class, and then all of a sudden there's this huge gap where the middle class should be, and then this ultra rich elite people, gets a little crazy. And the reason that he's saying that the middle class is so necessary is because otherwise you're going to have a revolution of sorts. You must. Because eventually those people who don't want anything, Tupac said it the best. Tupac said it a long time ago in an interview. He said, I think eventually that the poor are going to like just have nothing, and they're going to eat the rich. It wasn't just a saying that people had. He's like, that's what I think is going to happen. They're going to eat them. He goes, I remember he said, it's almost like the lower class is like banging on the door, and they're like, hey, we need food. We need food. And the higher ups, the elites, they have all the food, and they're just like, nah, there's no food in here. You can't come in. He's like, and eventually they start banging harder, and eventually they just kick in the door and they take everything. That's why that middle class is needed for democracy. Man, again, great podcast. If you want to hear the rest of that, I'll give you the timestamp right now. I started at 2 hours, 32 seconds, or 2 hours, 32 minutes, 14 seconds, and I ended off at 2 hours, 35 minutes, 29 seconds. So if you pick it up from there, there's another 10 minutes or so that he talks about, just like he starts telling stories about his father, and again, like how his father was talking with Martin Luther King. His father and Martin, they had a plan. This is very interesting. He didn't make this connection or like say anything about it, but they had a plan where they wanted people, they felt like people had to go to Washington, which Martin Luther King actually said this in his actual last speech, because I Have a Dream speech wasn't his last speech. It was his most nonviolent speech before he died, but it wasn't his last one. So they had this plan where they wanted a bunch of people to go to Washington, camp out, protest type of thing, right? So Martin Luther King actually goes to a bunch of union halls, black and white. Martin Luther King was doing the same thing RFK was doing. He was trying to bridge the gap. So he was going to union halls, and union halls are filled with black people, white people, working class people. And what Martin Luther King actually said was, we should go to Washington. And this is, I just made this connection myself. He doesn't talk about this, but Martin Luther King, some of the last things he said before he got assassinated, we should go to Washington and make sure we get our 40 acres and a mule. He goes, we should go to Washington and make sure that we get it. So he's talking about protest. And then at the same time, him and RFK were talking about doing something like this. Days after that speech, Martin Luther King gets assassinated. 2 months later, RFK gets assassinated. Wow. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. But anyway, like the video. Please like the video. It helps so much. If you've watched this far, like the video. You must have liked it a little bit. You couldn't have been sitting here the whole time just getting pissed, looking at my face. Really? Is that where you were at? I'm sorry if you were. But if not, please like the video. It helps us tremendously. And otherwise, other than that, I am out. Soul not for sale.